Hello and welcome. His tireless campaigning for the world to be more aware of the dangers of climate change finally got recognition when he took the stage with the former US Vice President Al Gore to receive the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. This week on 101, meet the award-winning activist and Indian entrepreneur, Dr. Rajendra Pachauri. It was a comfortable early life for him and his brother VK in the hill station of Nainital in India, and his school years reflected a high standard of education. Rajendra Kumar Pachauri, known as Pachi, studied engineering and then climbed India's corporate ladder before heading up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which led him to share the Nobel Peace Prize with the former US Vice President Al Gore in December 2007. An avid cricketer, Dr. Pachauri has faced a fair amount of controversy in the media over the years, from allegations of him personally benefiting as head of the IPCC, which he has strongly denied, to an error in the panel's fourth report that the Himalayan glaciers would disappear by 2035. Staying philosophical, Dr. Pachauri says that there's always a price to pay for caring deeply about the environment. Dr. Pachauri, a good chance to have a chat with you. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
To what degree do you feel, the way things are going nowadays, that people are actually starting to pay attention to climate change, that the world has turned a corner that might make a serious difference?
Well, I'm actually very encouraged, because if you look at the spread of awareness all over the world, it's been phenomenal over the last 2 years. And I wouldn't want to take all the credit for the IPCC, but essentially it was after the fourth assessment report of the IPCC came out in 2007 that there's been an explosion of awareness creation and understanding of what climate change is all about, including among world leaders.
Why is there still then so much debate, so much argument about the validity of the evidence? That still seems to exist.
Well, you know, there are some skeptics, and of course their numbers are dwindling very rapidly, but that doesn't mean that the decibel level of their voices has gone down. If anything, it's become shriller. And we must also accept the fact that, you know, there are vested interests who are paying lobbyists, who are essentially trying to see that their short-term interests are taken care of. So I would say otherwise. I think acceptance of the scientific realities of climate change is now pretty widespread, and there really is no doubt.
What particular concerns do you have about the way we are tackling the issues in terms of, you know, is it lack of speed, is it lack of sincerity, lack of resources?
Well, the lack of speed is really worrisome, because, you know, we've clearly brought out our assessment that if we want to limit temperature increase to, say, 2 degrees to 2.4 degrees Celsius, then we have to ensure that global emissions peak no later than 2015.
In your opinion, what happens if we don't reach those deadlines?
Well, if we don't, then there's going to be chaos in several parts of the world, and one doesn't want to exaggerate this scenario, but the fact is that you've got the small island states, you have nations like the Maldives, you have low-lying coastal country like Bangladesh. Sea level rise would play havoc. There's going to be a negative impact on agricultural yields in several parts of the world. We have in fact projected that there are some countries in Africa that as early as 2020 would see a 50% decline in agricultural productivity. So, you know, all of this means that there's really going to be a major disruption of stability of social activity and behavior all over the world.
And one of your key concerns is the fact that it's the poorest nations that are most affected.
Unfortunately, that's true, and I think there's also, therefore, an ethical dimension to this problem, because these are countries that have in no way contributed to the problem as it stands, but they are going to be the worst victims of the impacts of climate change.
And there are some of those who worry that you, in your position, you know, are taking some risks in expressing your own opinions, mixing it in with the IPCC, which is primarily facts and figures. How do you respond to that?
Well, I've been accused of that, but, you know, I always draw the distinction. You see, when I'm talking about IPCC findings, clearly I've never deviated from anything that the IPCC has said. But in drawing inferences, as a human being, as someone who has some basis for analyzing what might happen, I see no reason why I shouldn't express my views. And therefore, as a human being, as someone who's concerned about the future of this planet and all the species who live on it, I've merely used the IPCC findings to project something which I believe should cause human concern.
Well, let's take you back to your roots and how you got to where you are today. You were born in Nainital, yeah? Right. Just a small hill station in India, which a very picturesque and beautiful place. At a time, a few years before the partition, which after India's independence and the partition that created Pakistan, a turbulent time as it became. What do you recall of that as a child?
Well, my recollections are essentially after partition, and clearly that was a turbulent period. There was a lot of tension. But you know, I, for instance, finished my schooling in Lucknow, and my best friends were Muslims. We never really drew any distinction between the two religions. And therefore, I find it extremely painful, and it causes me deep anguish. I've been to Pakistan several times. I have the best of friends over there. The last time I went, the President of Pakistan hosted lunch for me. So, you know, when I go back in time to the period of partition, I really think this was a period, I hope a momentary period, of insanity, which future generations are really going to say, how the hell did we do this?
Although there are generations carrying the baggage, and I wonder, how did from what you recall, how did your parents handle what was going on?
Well, my parents were very liberal people. My father was a PhD from London in psychology, and my mother was well educated. And you know, I was born a Brahmin, and yet we were never at all parochial in our views, and therefore I find it totally unacceptable that we have leaders on both sides of the divide who are actually taking us back in time. And I think it's for the public of the subcontinent to take a stand and tell our leaders enough is enough.
Your father, as you say, went to London, studied there, and then came back to India, similar to a path that you took yourself.
Yes, I did.
And in terms of his influences, other aspects of his character, what rubbed off on you?
Well, I think he was a person who always upheld certain principles in life, and you know, he was never one who went after worldly gains in any way. And my mother was a great doer, so I think they were in some sense a remarkable combination. And I hope I picked up a little bit from both of them.
Your mother was born to Indian parents in Burma, now Myanmar.
She really was one of those people who would never give up if something had to be done. She said, you just keep at it and you'll get it. As you had said,
you attended a fairly, privileged school, actually, in Lucknow, the school called La Martiniere. Were you aware at that time of your sort of privileged circumstances?
Yes, I was, and that stayed with me all my life. I've always felt that my parents, who were really middle-aged, middle-class people, sacrificed an enormous amount to give me a lifestyle and an education which perhaps was actually beyond their means. And that feeling has never left me. I've always felt privileged, and therefore I've always felt responsible to society. And I feel that since I've had this position of privilege, it's for me, I owe it to society to give something back to it.
You've also said you were very deeply influenced by your brother VK, who sadly passed away relatively young. What happened?
Well, you know, he was an extremely active sportsman and very proficient. And one fine day, I mean, he was 41 years old, he was playing a championship game of squash. And he was he trailed 2 games, won 2 of them, and then he was fighting for in the 5th game and was possibly doing his utmost to win. And he had a sudden heart attack, and he just died in a few seconds. And no one could ever have predicted that.
You went on and studied to be an engineer, basically. To what extent did that help you get an understanding or some sort of insight to the issues you're dealing with now?
Well, I think in retrospect that was perhaps a very useful period of education for me, because you know, a lot of issues related to the transition that the world has to make and the sort of technological revolution that we require certainly is rooted in the ability to understand what technology is all about. And I was involved in establishing a premier diesel locomotive manufacturing facility in Varanasi, the Diesel Locomotive Works, at a very, very young age. And, you know, I learnt the hard way. My learning curve was very steep. And that has remained as an asset with me. I hope I can use it fruitfully in whatever I do.
And of course, all eyes are on you, and people are listening to what you say. You personally, how do you make sure your carbon footprint is minimized? What do you do to try to preach, follow what you preach?
Well, my carbon footprint is terrible. It just gives me a great sense of guilt. What I try to console myself by saying is that, well, if I can persuade a large number of people to do something about their carbon footprint, then maybe it gives me a basis to feel somewhat better. I also, in my own personal life, try to practice what I preach. I've become a vegetarian over a period of time. I don't waste anything as far as I know, as far as I can help it. When I step out of my office, I always switch off the lights. And, you know, waste is something that really gives me a great deal of discomfort. So I try to practice that, but I'm afraid that's not enough, given the amount of air travel that I indulge in.
Well, Dr. Pachauri, we have more questions for you. Don't go away. More with Dr. Pachauri when 101 returns. Welcome back. You're watching 101. We're speaking with Dr. Rajendra Kumar Pachauri, who is an environmental advocate and academic. Tell me about that moment on 11th of December 2007 when you and Al Gore delivered your acceptance speeches in Oslo in Norway for the Nobel Peace Prize there. What was going through your mind?
Well, I think the first thought that came to my mind is that, as perhaps Churchill would have said, I felt that I owed so much to so many, although he said just the reverse. Anyway, what I felt basically was a great sense of gratitude for being in a position where I was representing the entire scientific community, working in the field of climate change, and being able to stand there and deliver my acceptance address on that occasion. And it's such a humbling thought, and it's such a magnificent moment that, you know, you're sort of overawed by what you're going through. But it was also extremely elevating and extremely inspiring.
Let me ask you something. In that speech, you referred to the Hindu philosophy of Vasudeva Kutumbakam. And I wonder, it means the whole universe is a family. And I wonder to what degree, you had a sort of a spiritual sort of influence in your life, throughout your life, that sort of made you point to that or allude to that.
Yes, undoubtedly. I mean, if you are born and you spend the early years of your life in a place like Nainital, spirituality is in the air, and you just find it so overwhelming to be in the lap of nature and to see what nature, what creation is all about. And I think it doesn't leave you through your life. So, you know, whenever I'm confronted with worldly problems and difficulties, I think that sense of spirituality and the importance of the human spirit comes back to me, and it certainly makes me feel that I'm equal to the task. And I suppose that's why I said what I did on that occasion. And I believe in the field of climate change, we really have to act as a family.
Everyone thought it was very significant that the issue of climate change could be given so much credibility that it went to the Nobel Peace Prize level. Although it had its controversies, because Al Gore had written a few things and had been resisting your election to the IPCC, saying you're the let's drag our feet candidate because you would influence it in a negative way, maybe too slowly. How did you handle that sort of animosity at the time?
Well, you know, I've always maintained a good relationship with him, and we've become very good friends. And I'm sure Al wouldn't mind my mentioning this. When he telephoned me on one occasion and spoke to me about it. He said, look, when a bone breaks, often the joint is stronger than the original bone itself. He said, that's how our friendship is going to be. And I think it's been that. He's such a wonderful person. I mean, I have the greatest warmth and regard for him.
That apart, the Nobel Peace Prize apart, what do you see as the defining moments, the highlights in your career?
Well, you know, I always refer back to a teacher I had in the final year of my school by the name of Mr. Flynn, Arthur Flynn. He taught me mathematics. And he gave me such a wonderful feeling of satisfaction from doing something that was deeply academic, challenging, and required intellectual endeavor. And that never left me. And that's one of the reasons why I went back to higher studies and did my doctorate and so on. So if I go back in time, I believe my interaction with Arthur Flynn, who incidentally is around, I went and saw him a couple of years ago in Bangalore. He lives with his daughter. That really was a defining moment. And you know, it just helped me realize who I was. And it gave me a sense of confidence in being able to apply my mind to something that would ultimately give me a great deal of satisfaction.
Arthur Flynn apart, who has inspired you in life? Who have been your mentors? I know you see the Mahatma Gandhi as one who was inspirational as well.
Yes, I'm discovering Gandhi gradually, and you know, I realize what depth that person had in being able to understand the problems across the globe, intratemporally, temporally, and intertemporally. He was really a person ahead of his time in every sense. Another person who influenced me greatly was an economist by the name of Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen, who really should have got the Nobel Prize in economics, but he was so much against the neoclassical mold of economics that obviously he wouldn't have got it. But I would say he was perhaps the first environmental economist in the world. He really moved me greatly with his writings and thought.
So what is the most frustrating aspect of the work you do?
To be quite honest, I really don't have any frustrations. I mean, if I go back in time the last 2 years or so, I haven't seen any frustration at all.
That's
I haven't felt
encouraging.
it. Yeah. Not professionally, otherwise, yes.
It's interesting because you're using the media now, obviously, and making the most of the media. What do you see as the tools, the next tools that you could utilize to try to create change?
Children. I think we have to sensitize the young and tell them how their future is going to be affected if we don't take action today. And I think children are by and large very sensitive, and they understand. They know what's at stake. And I think if we can get them to understand the seriousness of the problem, they would probably shame adults into taking the right steps.
You feel they could drive change?
I think they could drive change, and you know, they are certainly far more effective than adults would be in a situation like this.
When you look at what you've done so far, and it's quite a lot, what mistakes do you feel you've made? What would you turn the clock back on?
Well, I mean, to be quite honest, it's been an exciting journey all the way, and you know, there's perhaps if I had understood some of these issues early on in life, I would have got into them much earlier. But then on the other hand, often you have to learn the hard way. You have to learn by making a few mistakes, going up in a particular direction, and then realizing that you've got to move back. So I would say overall, I really don't think I would have changed very much.
Is there anything outstanding that you'd like to do, something that would be, whether it's personal or professional, that you would like to achieve that you haven't had a chance?
Yes, one thing that I really would like to move forward on as a mission is what I've launched through my institute called Lighting a Billion Lives. We must find a way by which this large mass of humanity which has no access to electricity can at least get proper lighting once the sun goes down. There are 1.6 billion people in this world who have no access to electricity. And this program essentially focuses on providing solar lanterns to people in villages. And this gives them decent, clean lighting. It also provides women in a village with a livelihood, because a woman, for instance, typically would charge solar lanterns during the day, rent them out in the evening. It's a game changer. It's something that really opens up enormous opportunities. So I'd like to see that in the next 5 years we make major headway with this program, and it would give me enormous satisfaction if we can bring that about.
Now, you're a very keen cricketer, very keen, and I mean, actually an excellent player. You've played hundreds of matches and won lots of trophies. I can see in your eyes you're saying now the conversation has really started. Just tell me about how that passion began and how you took it so seriously.
Well, I started playing cricket when I was 8 years old, and there I owe a great deal to my elder brother, who was a passionate cricketer himself, and he was my role model. And you know, it stuck with me, and I play cricket regularly. I just played this weekend, bowled 6 overs, got 3 wickets against a pretty good team.
You're particularly a good bowler, aren't you?
Well, I mean, I used to be good. I used to be fairly fast. I'm now a gentle medium pace, but I can still swing the ball in both directions. And over the years, I've learnt a few tricks by which I can study what the batsman is going to do and try to fool him. And often I do succeed in doing that.
Now, if you look a few years down the road, you have a pretty hectic schedule now, flying around all over the world. What do you see yourself doing down the road? Will you have time for yourself? Will you take up something different? Will you look at retirement?
Well, I'd like to write a lot more, and retirement is a word that, you know, frightens me. I don't see myself retiring till the day I just drop dead. But no, I have much to do. I also want to make a movie. I'm working on the script of that. There's a novel that I've written which would be coming out in the next 2 or 3 months, and I want to do a lot more writing. I also have a whole sheaf of poems which I need to publish one of these days. So, you know, I've got a fair amount on my plate which will keep me busy for a while.
How would you like to be remembered?
Well, as someone who was a sensitive and good human being.
Dr. Pachauri, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.